Donald Trump is facing a growing revolt from Republican politicians over his administration's handling of the fatal shooting of nurse Alex Pretty at the hands of immigration enforcement in Minnesota. It comes as another man is fighting for life in Arizona after also being shot by Border Patrol agents in that state. Officials say that man fired at officers first while trying to run away. CBS colleague Ed O'Keefe reports from the White House.
President Trump touched down in Iowa this afternoon, hoping to refocus on the economy and rally Republicans ahead of this fall's midterm elections. But the growing fallout over the shooting in Minneapolis followed him there.
Why did you decide to shake up your leadership team in Minnesota?
CBS News has learned Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is facing internal scrutiny over her handling of the shooting. After a 2-hour Oval Office meeting Monday night with the president, Noem will no longer oversee ICE operations in Minnesota and refocus on southern border security and FEMA.
I think she's doing a very good job.
Hey friends, Adam is here. So what is happening right now? Behind the staged photos and polished optics, the Trump presidency is fracturing on every front at once. Republican senators openly defying their own president, tens of thousands of citizens walking out of workplaces and classrooms in coordinated protest, and resistance inside the House becoming too visible to edit out. This isn't isolated opposition. This is synchronized unraveling.
We are tracking breaking news this hour. Protests are underway at Columbia University after a student was reportedly detained by ICE agents inside a campus residential building. This was the view over the campus about an hour ago. You can see large groups of people gathering and marching. It remains unclear if these are Columbia students or people associated with the university. Of course, all of this is happening after Columbia's acting president sent an email to students about this incident. In it, she says in part that federal agents made misrepresentations about searching for a missing person to gain entry into the residential hall building early this morning.
And then there exists CPAC, that peculiar annual gathering that operates as something between a conservative revival meeting and a bizarre political carnival. The familiar constellation of figures was fully present. Elected Republican officials mingling freely with administration insiders like Justice Department Deputy Todd Blanche, immigration hardliner Tom Homan, and media firebrands like Steve Bannon. Even Enrique Tarrio, the pardoned Proud Boys chieftain and convicted sedition conspirator, was observed circulating alongside disgraced former Border Patrol commander Gregory Bovino, the pair flashing thumbs-up grins for a photograph that speaks volumes about precisely who enjoys access to the corridors of power in this particular moment. But let us be absolutely precise about what we are actually discussing here. This is not performative theater masquerading as opposition. This extends far beyond Democrats simply fulfilling their designated role as the party currently out of authority. What renders this particular chapter genuinely momentous, what separates it cleanly from the standard rhythms of political combat, is the unmistakable bipartisan character of what is unfolding. Republican senators are actively breaking formation with Trump.
This week, Donald Trump suffered a huge defeat, and I want to talk about it for a minute. He suffered a huge defeat both in the House and in the Senate. The Senate agreed to look at a War Powers Act. This is a big deal.
The yeas are 52, the nays are 47. The motion is agreed to.
5 Republicans joined with Democrats, including people like Todd Young and Josh Hawley. We'll see more discussion of the War Powers Act on the floor of the Senate next week, but this is a very big deal.
Not merely 1 or 2 isolated defectors nursing private grievances. 5 Republican senators aligned with Democrats to propel forward legislation restricting Trump's military latitude concerning Venezuela and Greenland. 52 votes against 47, a clear majority of the United States Senate, including members drawn from his own political apparatus, declaring unequivocally that the commander-in-chief requires congressional restraints on his war-making authority.
The Senate has passed a test vote on a war powers resolution that would block U.S. forces in Venezuela. This happening moments ago here, and I wanted to share this on your screen. This is from reporter Cami Mondo saying the Senate passed that war power resolution to rein in President Trump's military authority in Venezuela. That vote, 52 to 47, 5 Republicans voting in favor. And going on to list the names there, Paul, Collins, Murkowski, Hawley, and Young. Now, we do have other lawmaker reaction coming in here. This is from Ruben Gallego, saying the Senate is passing a resolution to block Trump's unauthorized war in Venezuela. The Senate has made it clear we will not send our young men and women off to war to line the pockets of big oil.
Trump's reaction to that legislative rebuke, claiming the measure severely compromises American self-defense capabilities and national security interests, functioned effectively as an admission that the strike landed with real force. When a sitting president begins publicly characterizing members of his own political coalition as disloyal threats to the republic, that posture does not emanate from someone firmly gripping the levers of control. That is the behavior of an individual who senses the perimeter contracting around him. And the defiance did not conclude with military authorization questions. Late in the previous year, 4 Republican senators, Collins, Murkowski, McConnell, and Paul, crossed Trump once more, joining Democratic colleagues to reject his sweeping emergency global tariff scheme. A 51-47 resolution delivering a sharp rebuke to his aggressive deployment of emergency powers on trade matters. This was not their inaugural act of defiance either. Reports documented that this marked the 3rd separate occasion within a single week that Republicans had partnered with Democrats to push back against Trump's tariff fixation. 3 distinct votes in 7 days, Republican senators repeatedly rejecting their own president on what he regards as his signature economic instrument. All of this unfolded during the identical time frame when the Supreme Court was striking down those very same tariffs in a decisive 6-3 ruling. Consequently, Trump found himself absorbing simultaneous blows on the trade front from both the judicial branch and members of his own party seated in the upper chamber. That combination is far from trivial. It represents a genuine multi-directional erosion of his capacity to act without confronting meaningful consequences. Consider this reality for a moment. The candidate who constructed his entire political persona around absolute dominance and unquestioning party fealty is now witnessing Republican senators repeatedly teaming up with Democrats to obstruct his agenda multiple times within a single week. The carefully cultivated image of total control is accumulating serious structural damage. Then arrived the State of the Union address. The ceremonial evening when a president traditionally stands before a joint session of Congress and broadcasts strength, accomplishment, and vision to a nationwide audience. Instead of that familiar pageant of presidential majesty, Trump encountered a Democratic caucus that had clearly resolved to abandon all pretense. Senator Mark Warner simply stood and exited the chamber. His explanation was unvarnished and direct. He stated he could not remain seated while what he characterized as a cascade of falsehoods poured from the podium. Other Democrats brandished signs in silent rebuke. Some sat utterly motionless, refusing to offer even the minimal polite applause that decorum customarily demands. Several skipped the proceedings entirely, a calculated and highly visible statement rejecting any participation in normalizing what they regard as an illegitimate exercise of authority. The visual narrative unfolding across national television screens, the conspicuous empty chairs, the handmade protest placards, the senators striding purposefully out of the chamber, the rows of stony expressions refusing to perform respect, communicated a story that no words emanating from the podium could fully overwrite. It communicated the story of a president whose opposition has reached such an acute breaking point that they will no longer maintain even the superficial appearance of institutional deference to his presence within that hallowed chamber. Beyond the marble corridors and polished floors of Washington, on the anniversary marking 1 full year since Trump's return to power, something truly extraordinary unfolded across the American landscape: the Free America Walkout. Citizens inhabiting every single one of the 50 states departed their workplaces and educational institutions at precisely 2 in the afternoon in a synchronized act of mass civil defiance. The organizing coalition framed the demonstration as a protest against the administration's intensified ICE raids, its deployment of National Guard forces within American communities, and its systematic assault on LGBTQ rights and immigrant populations. The declaration issued by the movement was sharp-edged and deliberately provocative. Confronted with what they explicitly termed fascism, they pledged to render themselves ungovernable. Tens of thousands of participants, spanning all 50 states, coordinated with precision on the exact anniversary of his return to authority. That is not spontaneous emotional venting. That is organized, sustained, strategically calibrated resistance. And it feeds directly into the broader portrait of a presidency confronting pushback not merely from political elites operating inside the Beltway ecosystem, but from everyday Americans spread across the entire national expanse who have determined they will not quietly acquiesce to the trajectory their country is following. Now we must examine with considerable care what all of this actually signifies and why it matters far more than the individual incidents might indicate when each is viewed in isolation. The natural inclination when covering developments of this nature is to compartmentalize each component. The Senate votes become one discrete news item. The State of the Union disruption gets filed as another separate narrative. The Free America walkout occupies a third distinct category. When examined in isolation, each appears notable but ultimately manageable. Precisely the variety of political turbulence a skilled administration could reasonably weather and transcend. But when you assemble these disparate pieces and scrutinize them as elements of a single emerging pattern, the composite image they generate becomes genuinely threatening to the narrative of absolute control this White House has labored so intensively to project outward. Begin with the Republican Senate defections, because these constitute the most immediately consequential political development in the entire landscape. When Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Mitch McConnell, and Rand Paul cast votes against Trump on his emergency tariff agenda, these are not spontaneous or impulsive gestures. These are four of the most politically seasoned operators in the entire Republican conference. Collins and Murkowski have spent years navigating the perpetual tension between their moderate-leaning constituencies and the demands Trump imposes upon them. McConnell's tangled and bitter history with Trump stretches back across years and encompasses some of the most acrimonious public ruptures in modern Republican politics. Paul's libertarian-inflected opposition to executive overreach on emergency powers and war authority aligns seamlessly with his long-established ideological commitments. These four senators crossing Trump repeatedly within a compressed time frame is neither coincidence nor rebellion pursued for its own gratification. It signals that a distinct floor exists beneath which Trump's capacity to command automatic Republican compliance in the Senate simply does not extend, and that floor is being tested with increasing frequency and intensity. The war powers votes demand particular scrutiny because they connect directly to something genuinely alarming that has been simmering just beneath the surface of the daily news cycle. The vote where 5 Republicans joined Democrats to advance legislation restraining Trump's military authority over Venezuela and Greenland did not occur in a vacuum. It unfolded against a backdrop of escalating presidential rhetoric about employing military force in ways that made even members of his own political tribe profoundly uneasy. The Greenland situation, where Trump has issued increasingly aggressive pronouncements about American acquisition of that territory, including through military means if deemed necessary, represents precisely the sort of scenario that genuinely alarms senators across the partisan divide. The implications of a president unilaterally deciding to deploy armed force to seize territory from a NATO ally are nearly too severe to fully contemplate. The Venezuela question raises parallel concerns about unauthorized military engagement lacking congressional authorization. So, when 5 Republican senators vote to apply legislative brakes to those military designs, they are not simply making a political gesture. They are responding to a genuine and documented anxiety that this president's martial ambitions have outpaced any coherent legal or constitutional justification. The 52-47 tally demonstrates something that warrants emphasis. A clear majority of the United States Senate, a majority that includes members drawn from Trump's own political party, is stating unequivocally that his military moves require restraint. That is not insignificant. That is authentic constitutional pushback emanating from within the legislative branch itself. Now consider the State of the Union walkout and what it reveals about the evolution of Democratic strategy. Senator Warner exiting the chamber and publicly declaring he could not endure what he characterized as deliberate falsehoods represents a calculated escalation in how Democrats are choosing to engage with this presidency. For an extended period, an internal debate simmered within the Democratic Party regarding the appropriate approach to Trump's public appearances. Do you attend and participate in the standard institutional ceremonies because that is what your constitutional role demands? Or do you leverage those moments of maximum national visibility to register your opposition in the most conspicuous manner available? The Warner walkout and the wider pattern of Democratic disruption during the State of the Union offer an unambiguous answer to that debate. They have concluded that normalized participation in Trump's presidential pageantry, when they believe that pageantry serves primarily to propagate what Warner characterized as falsehoods, constitutes a form of complicity. Consequently, they are selecting disruption, visible, camera-ready, nationally televised disruption. This functions effectively as a communication strategy because the images of empty Democratic seats, raised protest signs, and a departing senator compete directly with whatever message Trump is delivering from the podium for the attention of the viewing audience. You cannot fully command the visual narrative of your own State of the Union when the opposition is making its defiance this visually explicit. That presents a significant communications challenge for any White House attempting to project strength and normalcy. The Free America walkout represents something fundamentally distinct from both the congressional resistance and the Senate defection votes. It embodies the grassroots organizing dimension of the opposition that is coalescing around this presidency. Tens of thousands of participants dispersed across all 50 states. That level of national synchronization does not materialize organically or by accident. It demands months of preparation, network construction, communication infrastructure, and strategic forethought. The fact that organizers successfully executed a truly nationwide walkout on the anniversary of Trump's inauguration indicates that a serious and well-resourced organizing apparatus is being assembled in opposition to this administration. The declaration promising ungovernability carries a very specific political meaning. It is not merely expressing dissent or frustration. It is committing to a particular form of sustained, disruptive resistance explicitly patterned on historical civil disobedience movements. Organizers who deploy language of that nature are signaling to both their participants and the administration they oppose that this is not a standalone event. It represents the opening phase of a sustained campaign. The timing, deliberately pegged to the inauguration anniversary, signals that this resistance intends to organize its calendar around Trump's calendar, weaponizing his own symbolic dates against him. Here is the connection that binds all these elements together most powerfully. The Senate defections, the State of the Union protests, the Free America walkout, the ongoing impeachment activity, the court defeats and appeal denials. All of these phenomena are feeding one another in a mutually reinforcing cycle. When Republican senators observe tens of thousands of people walking out across all 50 states on the inauguration anniversary, it alters their political calculus regarding the risk of breaking with Trump on specific votes. When Democratic senators witness their colleagues walking out of the State of the Union and generating massive media attention and social media engagement, it emboldens increasingly visible displays of resistance. When grassroots organizers see Republican senators voting against Trump on war powers and tariffs, it validates their argument that the resistance is producing tangible political results and that sustained pressure is effective. These are not separate, disconnected incidents. They constitute a developing ecosystem of opposition that is becoming more organized, more coordinated, and more politically effective with each passing month. That is the deeper story beneath all the individual headlines, and it carries genuine importance. The Trump administration's response to this constellation of challenges has followed a predictable but revealing pattern. Fury directed at the disloyal Republicans who crossed them on war powers and tariffs. Dismissiveness toward the State of the Union protests, characterizing them as mere partisan theater. Attacks on the credibility and motivations of the organizers behind the Free America walkout. What the administration has conspicuously not done is make any strategic adjustments to reduce the political pressure it continues to generate. No outreach to the Republican senators who broke ranks to understand their concerns and identify common ground. No acknowledgement that the scale of street-level protest represents an authentic political problem demanding a substantive response. The instinct remains fixed on doubling down, attacking the opposition, and projecting unshaken confidence. That instinct might have functioned during the first term when the resistance was more fragmented and less coordinated. But the opposition in this second term presents differently. It is more synchronized, it manifests in more locations simultaneously, and it is producing real, measurable political outcomes in the form of Senate votes that go against the president. Dismissing all of this with outrage and counterattacks is not a strategy. It is a reflex, and reflexes do not resolve structural political problems. Here are the essential takeaways from everything we have been examining, because several dynamics are shaping the political terrain heading into the coming election cycle in ways that will matter enormously. The Republican Senate defections on war powers and tariffs constitute the most politically significant element of this entire narrative and warrant far more attention than they are currently receiving. When Collins, Murkowski, McConnell, and Paul crossed Trump on emergency tariffs multiple times within a single week, and when 5 Republicans joined Democrats on the military authorization vote, these are not merely symbolic gestures. Those votes carry genuine consequences. The tariff rebuke votes form part of the broader pattern of congressional and judicial pushback against Trump's emergency powers agenda, the same agenda the Supreme Court later invalidated with its 6-3 ruling. The war powers vote represents direct legislative constraint on presidential military authority. The political significance of Republican senators demonstrating willingness to do this repeatedly and publicly lies in establishing that Trump does not possess unconditional command of his own party in the Senate. A limit exists. It remains narrow and applies only to specific extreme overreaches, but it exists. And the existence of that limit will matter increasingly as senators in competitive states begin calculating whether total allegiance to Trump represents the safest political position for their own re-election prospects. The Free America walkout and the broader grassroots organizing it represent signals that opposition to Trump in this second term is more sophisticated and durable than what he encountered previously. The initial resistance wave was largely reactive, driven by outrage at particular policies and events, and struggled to translate street energy into sustained political organization. What is developing now appears fundamentally different. The Free America walkout was planned for a symbolic date. It was coordinated across all 50 states. It employed the language of ungovernability, which signals a specific and historically grounded theory of political change through sustained civil disobedience rather than isolated protest events. And it is happening alongside, not instead of, formal political organizing through congressional pressure campaigns and electoral infrastructure development. The combination of street-level mass mobilization and formal political channel organizing is historically the most effective form of opposition movement building. That combination appears to be developing right now, and it will constitute a significant political force in competitive districts and states across the country. The State of the Union protests and walkouts are components of a deliberate Democratic communication strategy designed to deny Trump the uncontested presidential imagery he craves and requires. Every time a senator walks out and explains why on camera, it creates a competing narrative to whatever message emerged from the podium. Every sign raised by a Democratic representative becomes a social media clip that travels independently of the full address. Every vacant seat on the Democratic side delivers a visual statement about the condition of this presidency without requiring a single word of explanation. Democrats have determined that the method for combating Trump's mastery of political imagery and narrative is to inject visible disruption into the moments he most desires to control. The State of the Union is the most widely viewed political event of the year. Transforming it into a spectacle of Democratic protest and Republican unease rather than a seamless presidential showcase constitutes a strategic choice. And it is functioning as a strategy because the images from those protests traveled more widely on social media after the address than any of his prepared remarks. That is actually a sophisticated communications maneuver. The cumulative effect of all this resistance, the Senate defections, the walkouts, the mass protests, the court defeats, the impeachment resolutions, is gradually chipping away at the single most valuable political asset Trump has always relied upon above everything else, the aura of invincibility, the perception that opposing Trump is politically futile because he invariably wins, invariably survives, invariably emerges strengthened. That aura is what keeps Republican senators aligned even when they privately disagree. That aura is what suppresses opposition organizing because why invest time and resources in fighting someone who seems unbeatable? Every crack in that aura, every Republican senator who votes against him without suffering immediate political destruction, every mass protest demonstrating that opposition remains alive and organized, every court ruling rejecting his agenda, makes it incrementally easier for the next person to take the next step of visible resistance. The aura of invincibility does not shatter in a single dramatic moment. It erodes gradually through the accumulation of visible defeats and visible resistance that does not get crushed. And that erosion is precisely what is occurring right now across multiple fronts simultaneously. What should we watch for going forward? First, monitor whether additional Republican senators follow the lead of Collins, Murkowski, McConnell, and Paul in breaking with Trump on specific issues. The more this occurs without political catastrophe for those who do it, the more normalized the behavior becomes, and the more accessible it becomes to others. Second, observe whether the grassroots organizing infrastructure being constructed through events like the Free America Walkout translates into electoral infrastructure, volunteer networks, donor engagement, and voter registration that manifests in the coming primaries and general elections. Third, pay close attention to how Trump responds to the Republican defections specifically. Does he attempt to primary the senators who cross him? Does he escalate rhetorical attacks? Does he find mechanisms to pressure them back into alignment? His response to the defections will reveal much about whether he still possesses the political instruments to enforce party discipline or whether that enforcement capacity is weakening. Here is the fundamental reality. Trump entered this second term projecting total dominance, total party control, total command of the political environment. What is actually occurring is that on multiple fronts simultaneously, the dominance is proving less than absolute. Republican senators are voting against him on war powers and tariffs. Democratic lawmakers are walking out of his State of the Union on national television. Tens of thousands of people across all 50 states are organizing coordinated acts of civil resistance on the anniversary of his inauguration. Courts at every level are denying his emergency appeals and striking down his most aggressive executive actions. None of these developments individually ends his presidency or destroys his political power. But together they narrate a story about a presidency confronting organized, multi-front, increasingly sophisticated resistance from the Senate floor to the streets of every state in America. The crumbling is real, the resistance is real. And heading into the coming election cycle, both of those realities will matter enormously. Stay alert because the next wave of Republican defections and the next major protest mobilization are already being planned. When they arrive together, the political impact will exceed anything we have witnessed so far.